This is Jill Gunderson, and in this module we will cover models in the CakePHP MVC framework. On the basic level, a model is a class. Each model represents a table in the database. The model doesn't just represent the table, but anything that manipulates data. When a controller requests data from the model, any alterations or manipulation to the data should be performed in the model. This is our item model in our website. You can see that it's a basic class. These simple 2 lines of code provide the developer with the ability to create queries and save and delete data. How is this possible? Because of inheritance. Our item model inherits from the app model class, which inherits from the model class. The model class is the magical class which has all the functions that make mundane calls to the database a breeze. We were able to utilize these pre-built functions when we created our items controller. A model has a lot of possibilities. For this module, we will cover a few of them, including data validation, associated models, and model attributes. So what's in store for this module? We are going to continue our work on the catalog website. We are going to create another table and name it categories. We are going to use the console application that comes with CakePHP and bake our model, view, and controller for our new categories table. This will create the basic create, read, update, and delete for our new table. We will then link our category model and our item model together. This way CakePHP will know that our categories to items relationship is a one-to-many. We also don't want to forget about data validation. CakePHP has a sweet set of validation rules that will save a lot of time. Let's go ahead and get started. CakePHP comes with a console application that helps speed up the creation of common functionality that exists with most web applications. To access the Cake console, you will need to navigate to the app/console folder. Inside that folder, there are 3 files. They all need to be executable. You can make them executable by a simple chmod command. To use the console, you will execute the command /cake. If you type this in by itself, you will get the help screen, which looks like this. Here you can read up on how to access more help on a particular command. Here's a list of the commands that the Cake console has to offer. For our module, we will be using the bake command. The bake command provides quick code generation of simple tasks, which include creating files and code needed for create, read, update, and delete, our basic CRUD functionality. We can access the bake by typing in cake bake. This will bring up the following screen. From this screen, you would select the option that you would like to bake. We will focus on the model, view, and controller options. You can also pass in an option from the command line. Some examples are cake bake followed by model, controller, or view. Once executed, you will be presented with a screen that looks similar to this. You will notice that I'm in the bake model and that it has bypassed the options menu. Utilizing these 2 different commands, the bake console will walk you through a series of questions pertaining to the type of file you want and any specifications for that file. The last bake command that we will go over is the bake all. This command will not ask for individual specifications for any of the view, model, or controller. It is basically a quick way to get your MVC up and running for that particular area of your web application. This is what the screen for the bake all looks like. Let's go ahead and test out these commands in our CakePHP application. Before we use the CakePHP console bake command, we need to create another table in our database. I have already opened up PHPMyAdmin in a browser window and have selected the catalog database. The new table we're going to create is the categories table. I have it all ready to go, a simple paste, and we're set. Our categories table will have three fields: ID, name, and length type. For this table, we have stayed true to the CakePHP naming conventions. I'm going to go ahead and click Go, and you'll notice our categories table has been added to our database. Now we can go ahead and bake our model, view, and controller. I'm going to go ahead and open up a terminal. I've already navigated into my Catalog App Console folder. If I do a list, you'll see the three files here. They're all in green, noting that they are executable. In order to make a file executable, you would do chmod, the plus, an X, and then the file name. Since my files are already executable, I can go ahead and type in /cake and bake. Here's the list of options. I'm going to go ahead and start with the model, so I can just type in M. It then asks which database configuration I would like to use, and then it says what it's going to use if I don't type in anything. I want the default database, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. Now it presents us with a list of models that it can create. It can either create the item model or the category model. Since we already have an item model, and we don't have our category one set up yet, I'm going to go ahead and select 1. The next question is in regards to validation. Now typically, we would go ahead and say yes, but I'm going to go over the validation later in this module by hand, so for now we're just going to go ahead and select no. The next question here is in regard to model association. Basically, this is asking if it's a one-to-many, many-to-many relationship. We will be changing this later in the module, but for now we're going to go ahead and say no. It then presents us with what it's going to create. It's going to create a model named category, and it's telling us it's using the DB table of categories. It asks us if this looks okay, and it does. It has a default to yes, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit enter. It then prompts us about creating a test file. Since we don't have PHP unit installed and we're not covering testing in this course, we're going to go ahead and say no. We're now back to the main bake menu. Let's go ahead and switch over to NetBeans just to make sure that our model has been created. I already have NetBeans open and I've expanded the controller, model, and view folders. Inside the model, you'll notice we do have a new file named category. Let's go back over to our terminal. And we're going to go ahead and select controller this time. So C for controller, and it wants to know which database configuration we're going to use. We're going to stick with the default. It's now showing us a list of controllers that can be created from our current database. We're going to go ahead and select number 1 for our new categories table. The next question asks if we want to build our controller interactively, and we do. So go ahead and hit enter. It wants to know if we would like to use dynamic scaffolding. We don't, so I'm going to hit enter. This next question saves us a lot of time. It wants to know if we want to create the index, add, view, and edit actions. And we do, so we're going to go ahead and select yes. Now it asks us if we'd like to create the basic class methods for the admin routing. At this time we're going to say no, but I'm going to cover this in the authentication module later in this course. It now prompts us if we want to use helpers inside of our controller. You'll remember that we used a helper in the items controller called session. If we select no here, our next question will be prompted to ask us if we want to use the session setFlash method. I'm going to go ahead and select yes just to show you this process. Now it wants us to provide us a list of the helpers that we would like to use. We only want the session helper, so I'm just going to type in session. It now prompts us if we want to use any components with this. The answer is no. We're going to go ahead and hit enter. Here's the question I mentioned before about the session flash messages. I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Now it presents us with the information that we've entered. The helpers is going to be session and the controller name will be categories. Does it look okay? Yes. Go ahead and hit enter. It has now stated that it's made the controller, and it's also asking us about that PHP unit again. I'm going to go ahead and say no. And now we're back at the bake menu, so we can finish this out by creating our view. We're going to be using the same database configuration, so we'll go ahead and hit enter. And we're going to choose number 1 for our categories. And then it asks if we would like to build our views interactively, and we would. Go ahead and select yes. The The next question asks if we would like to make the index, add view, and edit views for our actions in our controller. We're going to go ahead and hit enter. It now asks if we'd like to create the view for our admin routing, and we do not. We'll be covering the admin routing later in this course. Now we're back at the bake options. We're going to go ahead and type Q for quit and hit enter. You can go ahead and close out of your terminal. We're back here in our catalog project in NetBeans, and we're just going to go look at our controller folder. You'll see the new categories controller was created. If you go down to the view folder, you'll see a new folder has been created called categories, and inside there you'll see our 4 new views. Now to test this out, we're going to go to our website. I'll open up a new tab, catalog, and we're going to type in our new controller, which is categories, and hit enter. You'll notice our layout is a little bit different than our items view. These views were created based off of a template that's stored inside CakePHP's console application. Let's go ahead and navigate around our new categories section. I can click on new category, and I can type in a category name. This one's going to be called DVD, and we're going to have length type of minutes. I'm going to go ahead and submit. You'll see our new entry is listed here. Now we have a few options. We can view, edit, or delete, just like our items section. So we'll go ahead and view. And when we baked, it gave us links to all of the other pages. So we can go and actually create a new category right from here. Or we can go back and we can delete this particular category. Or we can edit this category. We'll go ahead and edit it, submit. Now you'll see our list has been updated. I can also delete the item. It prompts me indicating that I'm going to be able to delete the item by clicking OK, or I can cancel. I'm going to click OK. And now we have nothing in our categories list. As you can see, we have the same functionality in our category section as we do in our items section, and we didn't have to code anything in our category section. That's the beauty of Bake. The model takes care of a lot when it comes to basic operations of our CakePHP website. Until now, we have not had to add anything to our models, and yet they have performed all the functions that we have needed. We have 2 models in our application. Currently, they are independent of each other, but we need them to be dependent. In this case, the item model relies on the category model. This is considered a one-to-many. There is one category to many items. In CakePHP, there are 4 association types: one-to-one, one-to-many, many-to-one, and many-to-many. Now I can guess that your thoughts are that the many-to-one is a little bit out of place. We will be covering the many-to-one in this segment. We will also be covering the one-to-one and one-to-many association types. For this introduction to CakePHP, we will not be covering the many-to-many association type. For the one-to-one association, we will use the variable name has1. We will set the value of our variable to the model that we are going to reference. So for example, if we were in a cake model, we would type public has1 and then equal to the model that we are referencing. And in this case, we want to reference the cake detail model. For more clarification, the current model that we're in would be considered the parent model, and the parent will use this variable. So we have 2 models, cake and cake detail. The main model, cake, will indicate that it has the association with the other model, in this case, cake detail. In a simple sentence, we can say cake can have one cake detail. Our second association type is a one-to-many association. The variable name that we will use is the has-many, and the value that this variable will be set to is the model we are referencing. This is the exact same as the one-to-one association. So for example, if we were in a main model of user, we would use public, has-many, and then equal to recipe. For more clarification, we are in the parent model, and the parent model will use this variable. So if we have 2 model names, user and recipe, the main model, or parent model, would be user, and this will indicate that it has the association with the other model, in this case, recipe. So for a simple sentence, we would say user can have many recipes. Now for the many-to-one association. This is not a typical association found in relational databases. This is basically a way for CakePHP to have a complement setting to the has one and has many associations. It's kind of like seeing the data from another direction. The variable name that we will use is belongs to, and we will set the value to be the model that is referencing the current model we're in. So for example, we have a main model of cake, and we are currently in the cake detail model. We would type in public belongs to and then equal to the cake model. So for more clarification, the child will use this variable. So if we have two models, cake and cake detail, the child model, in this case is cake detail, will indicate that it has the association with the parent model, which is cake. If we were to use this in a simple sentence, we would say cake detail belongs to cake. Each of these variables can be extended to have an associated array. Now each key value pair in the association has the ability to have more control over the association between the two tables. This is helpful when the database that you've inherited does not follow the CakePHP naming conventions. I'm going to show you a few examples of these type of association arrays that can be set. So here we're in the cake model and we have the has one association. You'll see that it's set to an associated array, and in there is a nested associated array. The first array key is set to the model that we are referencing. So in this case, cake detail. And that key has a value which is an associated array, which holds, in this case, two key value pairs. Here's an example of a has many extended array. You'll note the first associated array has a key of recipe, recipe being the model that user is referencing to. And the associated array of recipe has a key value pair for more information in regards to this association type. And our last example is a belongs to. Again, this is in the quote child model, and it is referencing its parent model. So in this case, it's saying it belongs to, and the key of the array is set to cake, which is the model or parent model that is referencing the cake detail model. And that is set to an associated array with a key value pair. Let's go over some of the keys that can be in those associative array. So for the has one variable, we can have class name, which would be the name of the model it's associated to, and we can set the foreign key. So this is the foreign key found in the other model. So again, if we have a parent child, the foreign key would be in the child model. Other possibilities for keys are conditions, fields, order, and dependent. You can find more information about each of these key possibilities at the following link. For the has many association, some possible keys are class name. Again, this is the name of the model that you're associating to. It can also have foreign key, and this is the foreign key found in the other model. Again, if I were in a parent model, my child would have the foreign key. Some other possibilities for keys are conditions, order, dependent, exclusive, offset, limit, and finder query. More information about these other key possibilities can be found at the following link. For the belongs to association array, the possible keys can be class name. Again, this is the name of the model it's associated with, and the foreign key. Now this is the foreign key in the current model, whereas before in the has one and has many, we were referencing the foreign key in the other model. This foreign key is the foreign key in the current model. The next possible key is type. The type indicates what kind of a join the SQL query will use. This defaults to left join. If you were to indicate a different type of a join, you will set the type equal to that particular join, but it must be in lowercase. Another key is order. The value that order is set to is the standard associated array that is used in the find query call. We used the order key in the find query call earlier in this course. Some other possibilities for keys are conditions, fields, counter cache, and counter scope. You can find more information about these particular keys at the following link. Just because we have a database that doesn't follow CakePHP standards doesn't mean that we won't be able to actually use CakePHP. The developers of CakePHP have made it easy to override those default values. This is a great help when we're trying to make associations between two tables. Even though our web application follows the CakePHP standards, we still need to set up our association type. Let's go ahead and set up those associations. We're now ready to make the association between our item model and our category model. But before we do that, we need to make sure our database has the field for the foreign key. I'm currently in the catalog database in the items table. I have added a new field called category_ID. This will hold our foreign key to the categories table. Now for CakePHP, the proper naming convention, you'll take the table name and singularize it. So in this case, categories is the table, and in singular form it becomes category. And then you add on the _ID, all lowercase. If we go to browse the contents of our items table, you'll note that I've already set 2 of the category_IDs on 2 of my items in my table. I've set them to the exact same category ID. I have a 2 here, and I have a 2 down here. Let's go over to NetBeans. I've already opened up my catalog project, and I have a file already open. This is the view template in the items folder. At the top, I'm printing out my item variable. This is the item variable that's being passed to the view, so let's go see what this looks like. So any of these titles have a link to my view, so I'll go ahead and click on the first one, and you'll see my variable being printed at the top. Now let's go ahead and associate our item table to our category table. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my item model that I've already opened up, and in here I want to make a public variable. Since the item model holds the foreign key, category_ID, it acts as the child to the category item association. So since it's the child, we're going to say that it belongs to, and then we're going to set it to category. Now the string value is the model name, not the database name. So let's switch back over to our website. I'm going to stay in the same view, and I'm going to hit refresh. You'll now see CakePHP has added on the other model information to this view. We can now display extra information about our item, including the category that the item belongs to. Let's go ahead and display this information in our view. So right under the title, we'll just make another paragraph tag. And I'm just going to copy this variable and paste it here. So we would change this item to be category, the name of the model, and then for our second key in the array, we would specify the field name from the database we would like to display. In this case, we want the category name, and the field in the database is name. Now we have our variable set to display what category this item belongs to. I'm going to go ahead and delete our printing of our variable, and if we go back to our website and we hit refresh, you'll see our new information is being displayed here on our page. Now let's go over to the categories list. We're now here at our categories page, which lists all the categories that we have in our application. Over in NetBeans, I've added to the view a printing of the category variable. So let's go see that in action. I'm back here at the categories list. I'm just going to click on the view button. Here at the top you'll see our variable being printed out. Let's go ahead and make an association from the category model to the item model. I already have my category model open, and I'm just going to type public. Now in this case, our category has many items, so we're going to use the has many association type, and again I'll type in the model name, not the table name, which is item. Switch back over to our website. We're still in the view of our category. This category happens to have an ID of 2. If you'll remember in the database, I've set the category ID to 2 here and a 2 here. So when I actually hit refresh on this, we now see those 2 items being pulled in because we've associated the category model to the item model. In this view page, we don't need to have any additional information from our item array. Now let's go back to our category model. We were able to create our database from the ground up with the proper CakePHP naming conventions, but sometimes we inherit a database that doesn't have those proper CakePHP naming conventions. Since we didn't inherit our database and we did create it from the ground up, we're able to have simple association strings. We don't have to pass in any extra information informing CakePHP of the associations between the category and the item model. But if for some reason we did inherit a database that didn't have the proper naming conventions, we would probably create a has many variable that looked a little similar to this. So I have my public has many, and then we set it to an associative array where item is our key, and then we set the value to another associated array. and inside of that, we declare what the class name is, and in this case, the class name would be the item class from the item model. So if we go over here to the item model, you'll see our class name is item. So if for some reason we had a database that was named differently, we would enter in this class name. And then we would designate what the foreign key would be. In this case, we are setting it to category_ID. Let's comment out our first has_many variable. Now each of these variables are in essence the same. So if we go back over to our website and hit refresh, we'll see the exact same information. You'll notice it didn't change. You can see how important the CakePHP naming conventions are in saving time as you create your web application. We're going to remove this detailed variable, and we'll just keep our simple declaration for our association type to the item model. We have successfully added an association from our category model to our item model, and from our item model back to our category model. Each CakePHP model has access to a default set of attributes. These attributes are based on the naming conventions that we covered earlier in this course. Since the developers over at CakePHP are realistic, they acknowledge that not everyone will be able to create their database from the ground up. This means that all the model attributes that are set by default can be overridden. This benefits us as a developer because it gives us more control and helps us with legacy databases and databases we've inherited. CakePHP has a list of the most used model attributes. I have reduced this list even further to those model attributes that I feel are the most commonly used. The first is the use DB config. This specifies the database connection that will be used. It defaults to the default database connection. For example, I have my item model and I want to set this new attribute. I would say public use dbconfig and have it equal to the new database connection string variable. In this case, I'm setting it to live. In the comments, I've put what is the default value, and in this case, it's default. The next model attribute is useTable. This specifies the table name that the model will be using. This is an important attribute if you're not using the CakePHP naming conventions. In order to set this attribute, I would say public useTable and then equal to the table name. So in this example, I would have an items table by default, but since my actual table name is products, I would set the useTable to products. The next model attribute is the primary key. This attribute is used if the primary key is something else besides the default naming convention of ID. For example, if my primary key was item ID, I would set public primary key is equal to item ID, where in this case the default would be ID. The next model attribute is the display field. This specifies which database field should be used as the label. This is used in scaffolding and in the find list calls. If this attribute is not set, it will use the name or title. So for example, in my table of products, my actual product name is called product name instead of name or title. I would need to overwrite that with a display field. I would type public display field equal to product name. Again, the default is name or title. The last attribute I would like to go over is the validate. This declares the rules that the model will use for validation. We will cover this model attribute in more depth later in this module. Let's go over to our catalog project and see if we can use any of these attributes in our models. Basically, we want to be able to describe the items in our database. Now our goal is to have this categories list displayed when we add an item or if we edit an item. I'm going to go to my items page. Here's our current list of items. When I go and click add item, I don't see a place where I can select my new category. So let's go ahead and add that. I already have my catalog project open, and I've opened up my add and edit templates in my items folder. So we need to add a new entry for our category ID. I'm going to go ahead and add my category list right before my title. So I'm just going to copy this, and I just need to change my title to be the category _ID. And I'm going to do the exact same thing for my edit page. So now if I go back to my website and I hit refresh on this page, you'll see that now we have a placeholder for my category. And it's already detected that it should be a select box. It detects this because of our naming convention. We put in category _ID, which indicates it is referencing another table. Let's go ahead and populate this select box. And in order to do that, we will need to edit our items controller. I'm going to scroll down to the add action. Just to review, the add action processes the data once it's posted, so we don't want to put anything in our if statement because we need it to display before anything gets posted. So we're just going to come down here and we're going to set a variable. So we'll do this, set, and the variable name will actually be the same name as our table. Now in this case, CakePHP will recognize if I put in my table's name. So our table's name is categories. And then we need to set the data for that particular variable. So I'm just going to type in this. And then we have to use our model name. And our model name for this is item. And we want our item model to reference our new category model. And on our category model, we're actually just going to do a find query. For our find query, we've normally used the all parameter. But in this case, we're actually going to use the list parameter. The list parameter grabs the ID of the table and then the column name that you designate. Now if we haven't designated a column name, it will default to grabbing a column name named name or title. We're fortunate because our category table, the column that we want is actually named name. So when I save this and go back over to my website and I hit refresh, and you'll see that we actually are seeing the list from our categories table. Now they currently are not in alphabetical order, so let's go ahead and go back to our query and fix that. We just need to pass in an array with an option of order, and we want to order it by name. Come back over here, hit refresh, and if we look at our category list now, it's now in alphabetical order, so it's easier for us to choose. Let's go ahead and add a test movie to our database. So we'll say we have a digital movie, and our title will just be test, and we can have a fake year. And we'll just come down here and hit save item. You'll see that our ad is correctly working. Let's go back and look at the database. I have cleared out the category ID values that were altered in our previous demo. This allows us to see that the category ID is being added when we create a new item and being updated when we edit an item. And you'll see our new item is coming in with the correct category ID. Let's go to our edit action and add the drop-down list as well. Since it's the exact same list, I'm going to copy this line of code and take it up to our edit action. Here's our edit action. Just like with the add action, we need to make sure our list is populated even if we're not posting any values. So we're just going to put it down here with our data. And let's go test it out. I'm going to go ahead and edit one of these movies that does not have a category set. This is the 1979 version. Let's go ahead and put that as a movie with VHS. We're going to update it. I'm going to refresh the table and you'll see that our category ID has been updated to 6. Let's go back to our website. I'm going to go ahead and edit our test movie, and you'll notice that it automatically selects the value that's coming from the database. Now we were lucky because our category table was set up with the correct column name of name. But what happens if a column name has a different name? That's where those model attributes come into play. Let's go ahead and play around with that. Let's go back over to NetBeans. Let's go ahead and open up our category model. And we're going to pass in one of those model attributes. We're going to override the default, and in this case the default name is what's being used with our table. We have another column coming in on our category table. Let's go ahead and look at that column name. We have it set here as length_type. For the sake of this example, we're going to go ahead and set our display field model attribute to be length_type. Now if I go back to my website, I'm just going to go straight to the add action, and you'll see in our category drop-down list, it now has the length type displaying instead of our default field of name. Let's go back and comment out our display field. Now if we go back to our website and hit refresh, you'll see that our category drop-down list has returned back to what it should be using the name column field. As you can see, model attributes are extremely easy to use. Data validation is important in any web application. Here is an example of validation that will be used in the model class of a CakePHP application. This is a modified version of the complex example that CakePHP has on their website. At first glance, it might be overwhelming, but we are going to go over all of the necessary information so we can make similar validation rules for our own web application. To start out, we will have a validation array that we will set in our model. That variable name is validate. So for example, in our model, we would set the variable public validate, and then it will equal an array. The array is an associated array with a key value pair. The key will be equal to the field name in the table in the database. The value will be equal to the rule name, which indicates the type of validation that will be performed. The rule name is a predefined string. There's a list of core validation rules that you can find on the CakePHP website. For example, we would set public validate and then our array, where our key is the field name in our table in the database, and the value is the validation rule that we will be using, in this case, email. The validation options, or rule names, are the rules that we use to validate our data. I'm not going to cover the complete list of validation options that CakePHP has, but I will cover some of the commonly used validation rules. First is the alphanumeric. This checks to make sure only alphabet characters or integers are in the field. Between will give you a range of values. Date will check the date format. Email will check the email format. Max length will check the max length of a value. And in contrast is the min length, which will check the minimum length of a value. Not empty. This checks to make sure that there is some type of value in the field, no matter what it is. Numeric will check to make sure that the value is only integers. Each of those rule validations can have its own array of information. This allows for better control over each field that you want to validate. When using this array, there are only 5 keys in the associated array that can be used. Those are rule, required, allow empty, on, and message. Here's an example of how you would set this up in the validate array. We have our validate variable set to an associated array, and that key is the field name in the database, and that is set to an associated array with the 5 keys for further validation rules on that particular field. Let's go over the 5 keys that we can use. First is the rule key. This is set to the name of the rule you'll be using. If you're using this detailed associated array, you must have this rule set. If it isn't set, the validation will not be performed on that particular field. The second is required. This can have 4 different options. First, you can have true or false. This makes sure that the field is present in the data array. You can also use create and update. It performs the same exact task as if you were using true or false, but it's doing this on the create or update of the save. Next, we have the allow empty. This takes a true or false value. If it is set to false, the field must have some data present. Now again, this differs in that the required makes sure the data key is in the data array, not that there's data in that particular field. The on key takes 2 options. It either can be update or create. This allows for certain validation to be performed if the entry is being created or updated. If you don't set the on to being update or create, it defaults to null, and this means that the validation will be performed on both update and create. Last is the message key. This is a custom validation message that can be set where it will be displayed for the user to see. This is the exact same data validation that I showed you at the beginning of this segment. Let's walk through this validation and we should have a pretty good understanding of what's going on. Here we are first validating the login field from the database. The rule that's being used with the login field is alphanumeric. It's also required, and it has a personal message for the user to see if the validation is not met. The password field in the database is validated by the rule minimum length. The minimum length is set to 8 characters, and there's also a personalized message for the user to see if the validation is not met. The email field in the database is being validated by email. There's no other validation requisites set for the email field. The last field in the database to be validated is the born field. The validation rule being used is date. This means that the contents of the field must be in a date format. There's also a personalized message set if the validation rules are not met. Lastly, the allow empty is set to true. Even though the validation at first glance seemed complex, once we broke it down, the validation for form data became very straightforward and relatively easy to understand. We can now take our new knowledge of form validation and apply it to our web application. Here we have our list of categories. If I go ahead and try and add a new category and just hit submit without filling in any of the fields, the category will be created, as you'll see down here with 2 empty fields. We need to add form validation in order to fix this situation. So if we go back over to new category, we have 2 fields that we need to make sure have validation rules on it. Let's go over to NetBeans in our catalog project, and you'll see that I have added the model attribute validate, and I've already included the 2 fields that we would like to validate. So just to recap the validate array, it's an associated array with a key value pair, where the key is the field name in the database, and the value is the validation rule. So in this case, we've already set up the name field and the length underscore type field. We just need to set the validation rule as the corresponding key value pair. So for name, we want to make sure that it's not empty, and we'll use the not empty validation rule. For length type, we'll use the exact same rule, not empty. Now if we go over to our website, here's our form field. If I hit refresh, you'll see that the asterisk has now been added to each of the field names. And if I try and submit, I'm prompted to fill out the 2 fields. Not empty will also cover the space in case someone tries to just enter a space into each of the fields. So if I hit submit and each of those fields have spaces in it, it will do a server-side check on the field data, and it comes back with an error saying that the field cannot be left blank. So now we can go ahead and enter in a new category name and hit submit. You'll see our new category here at the bottom. Now the validation also works for the edit, so I'm going to edit our empty fields here, and I'm just going to hit submit. Even though these empty fields are currently in our database, it is still registering that it's not valid data that is inside these fields, and that we would need to provide valid data. For this item, we're just going to go ahead and delete it. Let's go over to our items page. We'll just click on the add item, and you'll see our form here. The first 4 fields are the fields that we would like to validate. Our description can be optional. I've already set up the shell of the validate variable in my item model. Let's go ahead and open that. Here's my validate variable and the fields that we would like to validate. We want to make sure that we validate the category underscore ID field, the title field, the year field, and the length field. So for our category underscore ID, this is an actual foreign key which references the categories table. In this case, it will always be an integer. We want to validate it with the validation rule of numeric. For our title, we want to make sure that it's not empty. So we'll use the not empty validation rule. Now our year is a little bit more complex. We've added an associated array to our year field. Each field that references an associated array must have the rule key. So in this case, our rule will then reference a validation rule. We only want integers for our year. We want to reference the numeric validation rule. Now I've provided a detailed message saying, please enter a 4-digit year. The length field will also be an integer, so we'll use our numeric validation rule. Let's go ahead and test out our validation on our form. I'm going to hit refresh, and you'll see that the asterisks have now been added to the labels of each of the fields, except for description, where our description is optional. Our category drop-down list does not have an empty field, so this will always pass our validation. But let's go ahead and submit the form with these three being empty. You'll see that these three fields are highlighted in red, indicating that they don't meet the validation rules. Let's go ahead and enter in some data. Now I'm going to go ahead and click Save Item again. It is still indicating that our year field and our length field need to have valid data. Now each of these are supposed to be an integer. I'm going to go ahead and enter in some non-integer values. And the same thing for our length. Now I'm going to go ahead and save the item. You'll notice that these validation errors look a little different from our former submission. This is because the submission actually went to the server side and returned back, indicating that the fields did not meet the proper validation rules. Now if I enter in an integer for each of these fields, the item will be created. And an integer for length. And you'll see our newly created item. Let's go back and look at our item model validation. You'll see that I've kept it pretty simple for this particular validation example. You can see that there's other validation rules that definitely can be added to these four fields. For example, the year, we're just checking a numeric value. I could enter in a 1, a 0, or a million, and this validation would ring true. CakePHP's validation can get even more detailed to cover multiple validation rules per field. I'm not going to cover those multiple validation rules. You can find more information on data validation from the CakePHP website at the following link. CakePHP has what are called magic database fields. These database fields are modified and created dates. If either of these fields are defined in the database table, CakePHP will set the values automatically when an entry is either saved or updated in the database. Each field must be set to the datetime field type in the table, and the default value must be null. The field names are modified and created. If the created field is present in the database table, this will be set to the current date when the entry is added to the database. If the modified field is present in the database table, this will be set to the current date when the entry is added to the database. The modified field will automatically be updated to the current date when the current entry is updated in the database. Let's see this in action. I have added two new fields to my items table in my catalog database. The first field is created, and I've set the default value to null, and the second field is modified, and I've also set that default value to null. Each of them are given the field type of date time. Let's go ahead and browse the items in our table. I'm just going to scroll down. You'll see our new fields created and modified, and every single value in our table are currently set to null. Let's go to our website. I'm currently on the items page. I'm going to go and add an item, and we'll keep this very generic. And I'll go ahead and save the item. Now if we go back to our database and I hit refresh on this page, if we scroll down to the bottom, you'll see our new item entry, and here are two date fields. Here's created and here's modified. They are currently set to the exact same time. Let's go update our new item. I'm just going to go here and edit our item. Now I don't even need to alter any of these fields for this to work. So I'm just going to scroll down here and click Update Item. And if we go over to our database, I'm going to hit refresh again. And I'll scroll down here. And let's examine our two dates. This is the Create field, and here's our Modified field. You'll see the Modified has been updated with the new current time. That is the magic of the created and modified date fields. We didn't have to code anything, and these fields are automatically updated each time we add or edit an entry. This is definitely a luxury feature that CakePHP offers. We have covered a lot in this module. We reviewed the role of the model in an MVC framework. We also learned how to bake code which creates the basic CRUD structure for a particular table in the database. We covered how to associate two database tables together through their respective models. We also addressed the model attributes and how to work with a database that wasn't built with the CakePHP naming conventions. We also covered the basic concepts of data validation for our form fields. And lastly, we discussed the magic fields of created and modified.